many medical subspecialties will be completely changed or replaced. One of the first specialties that's going to be changed mostly by artificial intelligence is actually going to be orthopedics and musculoskeletal injuries. 50% of people will not make it to 76 or 78. Older parents make less viable offspring. If you add red light to stem cells, they produce different things. Certain cells they actually cause the stem cells to release different things. Exosomes are the greatest anti-inflammatory I've ever seen. As physicians, we risk the danger of becoming irrelevant.
You're listening to The Human Upgrade with Dave Asprey.
We're going to talk about something that is just part and parcel to my quest for longevity, and it's regenerating tissues, actually growing, health and growing maybe even new body parts. Our guest today is Dr. Pradeep Albert, who is an expert in stem cells and PRP and very specifically medical imaging and using AI to do what he used to do as a radiologist. And he's done 40,000 or so procedures, which means he's got a lot of experience to share with us. So we're going to go deep on the implications of AI for longevity. And I don't think you can do this living to at least 180 or not dying from the four most common causes of disease without some help from knowing what's going on in there. Sometimes it's lab work, sometimes it's observation, and sometimes it's imaging. You need all of it, and we're not going to get there without AI because the best people in the world, we're doubling our knowledge of biology every 13 months for all biology, and the amount for humans is likely faster than that. In fact, I've seen numbers up to every 72 days. So you can't be awake long enough to read everything. So we need a system, and we have the system now. We've got a guy who's using it. So welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Dave. It's a pleasure to be here, and fascinating material as always. And I'm not only happy to be here as a guest, I'm a big fan. So
what do you see happening with AI? Because if I'm at home and I can take whatever data I have about myself and I can run it through an AI system, do I need a doctor as much anymore?
What's happened is that over the past, I would even say the past year or two, with the advent of all the different AI tools and, language learning models that are out there, we noticed that there's been an incredible amount of information that's kind of democratized to the general public. Some of it, most of it's very accurate, frankly. Some of it is incorrect. But the interesting part is that I think healthcare, from a fundamental point of view, is going to change, and it's going to change very, very quickly. And I think if physicians in the United States are going to wait for the FDA or things like that to approve it, that's not going to happen. I think these things are going to come online from places all over the world, and patients are just going to enter the information, like you just said, and they're going to be able to get that data back, and then they're going to go back to their physicians or their healthcare providers and say, "Hey, you were wrong," or why did you do this? So it's going to be an interesting next couple of years.
I've seen a transition from, my parents' generation where you have the white lab coat up on an altar and whatever the doctor says you have to do, kind of a paternalistic view. Now, where some doctors from a couple of generations ago would say, well, I know the patient's terminal, but I'm not going to tell them because it'll just stress them out. I'm like, whoa. To me, that feels kind of shocking. But the shift now, it seems like doctors, at least the functional medicine, the longevity doctors, the regenerative doctors, they're like your partners and your coaches, and they're helping you think about things in a way that maybe AI doesn't yet. Is your doctor now a coach and a partner less than a dictator?
Well, yeah. Well, so the entire, just in my career as a doctor, when I first started, doctors were up on a pedestal, and now, we were and during the pandemic, we were kind of controversially discarded or brought back, depending on whatever you believe. But what's fascinating about what's happening in healthcare is that for patients need to be able to understand how things are. Like if you can get information, the same information from your doctor as well as from your AI. If the doctor doesn't communicate why something is and personalize it to you, then it doesn't matter, right? So I think that the personalization of medicine, which AI can help gather the data for, but to explain it to you and kind of look at things for you is what the role of the physician will be. But frankly speaking, I think that many medical subspecialties will be completely changed or replaced. I know for a fact, when you look at images, right, machines can do them faster, better, more accurately, far more important, far faster than I can ever do it personally.
Elon Musk is famous for saying, if you look at the deaths per mile driven from fully automated cars, that it's much less than the deaths per miles driven by humans because of the same reason you talked about. Is radiology or medical imaging at the point where technology is better at spotting problems than the average radiologist?
I think we're there for certain things, not for everything, right? So just like so one of the problems with medical imaging is that the way that the images are acquired, they're taken in different ways. And there's there is some standardization and there's different patterns that people do all over the world. So I would say, they talk about, there'll be a turning point or a flipping point. Probably, I would say within the next 2 years, I think that's going to happen. Now, it's interesting that you bring up driverless cars, right? So as a radiologist, what people talk about is that they think that people like me will get replaced first. What was fascinating is during COVID, when we had a significant decrease in the amount of accidents, what happened at that time was as insurance companies, when the initial part of the lockdown had to start giving back money. They weren't giving it back because they were good people. By law, they had to use a certain amount of their premium for actual accidents. So now they didn't know what to do because nobody was driving around, okay? So what happened is that there was a significant decrease in the amount of accidents. And I believe that one of the first specialties that's going to be changed mostly by artificial intelligence is not imaging, because that's the one everybody else thinks about as commonly. It's actually going to be orthopedics and musculoskeletal injuries, because the amount of accidents have decreased. The second thing that's also happened is that the amount of organ transplantation during that time diminished so much because we get most of our organs from young accident victims.
Oh, wow.
So, things that you never would think about. So the unintended consequences of artificial intelligence are really, are fascinating to talk about. It's not, people are thinking it's going to be, a replacement one for one. That's not the way it works.
Some people are bothered by this. Like one of the things, PT, after you have an injection in your shoulder or surgery, you need physical therapy and recovery and functional movement. And one of the pieces of tech at Upgrade Labs is an AI-driven functional movement exercise piece of equipment called OxFit. And it's all driven by AI, and it watches how you move, it measures how you move, and it changes it based on your physiology, much like a functional trainer would. So you could say some functional trainers are going, oh my gosh, that's evil. I don't think people are that motivated by technology. We're much more motivated by people. So the role of medical experts doesn't look like it's going to go away. But looking at 500 radiological films per day with your amazingly trained pattern matching system, it seems like working in a coal mine cognitively. It might take some of the drudgery out of it.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's nothing worse than doing that. I mean, no matter what profession you're in, right? If you do the same thing every single day, and ideally, hopefully, people that go into the specialty like I'm in, you have to be somewhat intelligent to do it. But you take someone intelligent and you're making them do rote work again and again and again. So interestingly enough, I think it frees up intellect to be able to do other things. So I hope we're not constrained just based on, our profession, but, it's up to us to kind of retrain ourselves and kind of look for other things in the same field, frankly. You don't have to look for things outside of your field, but I think it's going to be very interesting. I think that there are people that are survivors. They'll do whatever it takes to keep going. And there are other people that just like mentally check in, no matter what profession you're in. So I'm kind of excited by all the stuff that's going on, because at the end of the day, the reason that we become physicians in the first place is to kind of, we talked about that curve, that longevity curve, is to shift that curve to the right, to keep people alive, to keep people healthy. Those are the kind of things that I think that excites me and excites people like me.
So you have a couple of books, and guys, Pradeep has come on the show because we're interested to talk about this, and he's not a professional author in terms of, trying to sell a bunch of books. So this isn't to push a new book at all, but there's interesting stuff in here. His first book is for doctors about exosomes and PRP and stem cells. But this one, which is hitting Amazon, this will be on Amazon by the time it comes out,
Yes,
Lifespan Decoded, there's a chart in here, and it's just the death by age curve. And we always say, for me, our best is 120. I'm going to do 50% better. But the average, what's the average?
76 to 78, depending on, your race, your gender, where you live, et cetera. So it's variable, but let's say mid-70s.
Okay. So that's kind of scary, say mid-70s, but it's a curve. That means half of people die before that.
That's absolutely right. So that's an excellent point. So 50% of us will not make it to, it's ironic, you're someone that pushes longevity and, you're biohacking, and you're going to be 2 standard deviations away from the norm on the other side, to get to 180. But the average person, 50% of people that are listening, unfortunately, will not make it to 76 or 78 if statistics hold to be true, okay? And I know your audience is very different, and they'll be on the other side of the curve, but I'm talking about the general population. And one of the reasons that Dr. Alan Katz, who's one of my colleagues, and I wrote this book, is that how do we shift that curve to the right, okay? And we came up with 3 rules for longevity, and they're not simple, but I think they're straightforward, and they're kind of somewhat amusing. I mean, not amusing, but, rather simple.
Okay.
These are 3 rules that we call it the Longevity Fight Club, and, this is 3 rules, okay? 1 is don't die of a heart attack, okay?
It's a good move.
Number 2, don't get cancer. And number 3, avoid dementia, okay?
Nice.
Okay. Those 3 rules, if you follow, I know it sounds simple and silly, but if you follow those 3 rules, you can make it to the other side of the curve.
Interesting. I had 4 in my book. I had a diabetes list, but otherwise totally aligned.
Okay, there you go. Okay. Yes, we can add number 4, okay? But getting to that other side of the curve, right, requires, when we're talking about us as people, right, there's 2 parts of us, right? There's the genetics of us, right? The things that make us up, our parents, our ancestors, our heritage, whatever that may be. And then there's the things that we do, our epigenetics. So we break down this into 2 different, concrete portions of longevity. The genetics, which and we could talk about how we modify that and what we do with that you can't control. So the epigenetics is what you can control, and to kind of hack your genetics, okay? Because you're kind of moving your genetics into your epigenetics. So the analogy is it's like running a marathon, right? Life isn't fair. So let's say we all start at different places, right? And that's our genetics. So let's say you start at, a 26-mile marathon. Let's say your genetics are better than mine. You start at the 2-mile marker, so you have a 2-mile advantage over me.
Right.
Some of us may even have a negative advantage where we start negative 1 mile away.
I think I started out that way, hitting 300 pounds, all the arthritis at 14. Yeah, so I had to come from behind for sure.
So you're the master of the epigenetics. Okay? So what's fascinating is that if somebody's ahead of you by 2 miles, and they start off that way, and if they don't train for that marathon, right? If they're just eating donuts and eating chicken wings or watching football all day long, they're not gonna. And you start at -1, but you're training for the marathon. You're running every single day. You're eating right. You're still gonna beat that guy. Okay. So if we look at this as a race, we start off at different places. We end up. The idea is to win.
Right.
And the idea is to get to the other side. And then if you wait long enough, and the book gets into this, there will be technologies and different things, including artificial intelligence and all these different things that'll come out that will actually help us even push that further. So your 180 years that you want, I think is actually, I love the fact that you say that, because it tells me if you don't have a goal, then what's the point? Right? You can't, it's not, other people may listen to this and say, oh, that's insane. They're wrong. You need to have a goal. You need to have a number. If we talk about longevity, it's having a number. You better have that number and you better go for it. That's the way I think.
Yeah. It also creates this freedom where I feel like I'm just getting going, right? Whatever my last birthday was about 28%. So when I meditate, I get 28% duty cycle. And I think the body listens too. And that's kind of a spiritual mind over matter thing. How important is mindset? I mean, you're a hardcore imaging, you're a medical Western doctor.
Right. So, I'm not the kind of guy that usually meditates or thinks or, but, coming from, being born in India and coming from an Eastern philosophy of that, mind does have a significant portion of it. Now, It's funny when we talk about longevity, right? We talk about, people say, okay, my biological clock is this, my chronological clock is this, right? I'm 53, okay? And my biological clock is X. And people say that. For those people in that curve, the vast majority of them, because people, remember, people don't make that half of them die before they get to that midpoint. The most important thing for them is that their biological clock is past their chronological clock.
Yeah.
So if you really think about it, right? Like the people that are listening to this podcast, they're intelligent, they're hardworking, their biological clocks, for the most part, are going to be below the chronological part, like yours is, I'm sure. But for many of people that are just random people, it's the opposite. And that we have to flip that for everyone. And that is the goal of, that's a goal of, we're talking about longevity physicians versus regular physicians. Every physician should be a longevity physician.
Yeah.
I mean, it makes no common sense, right?
What's the point of you're an ER doctor? Trauma physicians are kind of their own breed, right?
Yeah.
But even then, the way you treat a trauma, if you realize that person's going to be around for 180 years, you might change how you stitch them up. Right?
True. Yeah, I think it affects every single aspect of health. Yeah. And you have to be, then it makes you mindful, because maybe you won't pollute because you think, hey, I may be around for 50 more years.
Amen. But people say, what about the environment if more people live longer? I'm like, well, number one, we have a population crash happening, and it's very strong in the data. And number two, if you might live for 200 years, you're not going to put the bottle in the ocean because it's going to be in a fish later.
Yeah, you may have to eat it.
Yeah, like you don't mess up the sandbox when you have to use it multiple times.
Absolutely. Well, what's fascinating, you just brought up the point about the population crash. So genetics, and we're talking about two things, right? Genetics versus epigenetics. So when you're talking about the actual genetics portion of life, and that's the one that was born with, what's happened, especially in Western cultures, is that there is an incredible, there's a negative population growth. You've seen it in Italy, you've seen it in Japan, you're seeing it all over Western Europe, and I think the U.S., possibly due to different forces, may be, equal.
We're equal, but we just had a lot of immigration the last year. We would have been negative as well.
That's correct. Yeah. Exactly right. So what's happened to us is that we have an aging, if we think about ourselves as mammals, as animals, if you take out the spirituality and you say we're mammals, we are reproducing at a later time than ever. So it's very common for guys, and I'll use, so I have 4 boys, and I have, twins. And I remember when my wife was pregnant with our twins, she just turned 35. And for women, they have to do an amniocentesis to make sure the kids don't have, Down syndrome. So they test every woman after 35 for genetic abnormality. But if you're a guy and you're starting to have a kid when you're in your 60s or 70s, they don't test anything.
And your chances are much higher of having damage to your sperm. This is my first book on fertility. So guys are half the problem, right?
Yeah, exactly. Perhaps even more. And it's very sexist, right? To just check just the way we were thinking. So this is going to sound, again, very controversial. Older fathers, older parents, and I'm guilty. I'm not like judging other people. I'm a physician, so I had to kind of shift my life because I had to do all this training. But older parents make less viable offspring.
Unless they do something about it first, before pregnancy.
Right. Absolutely. No, of course, this doesn't apply to everyone, but I'm just saying.
On average, it's totally...
on average, but this is, we're talking about shifting that curve to the right.
Yeah.
So what we could be doing, if you look at it historically, that curve, antibiotics and other types of surgical interventions that push that curve to the right. I mean, in Western society, the average life expectancy used to be in the 30s and 40s, and now it's in the 70s. In Eastern cultures, it was always in the 60s and 70s, ironically, when you were in Tibet, and you see people live, very, very old ages, right?
Oh, yeah. They're all over the place.
Yeah. Now, what's fascinating is that by changing our epigenetics, by reproducing later, we could be inadvertently shifting the curve to the left without us knowing it. So that's a fascinating principle about longevity. And that's not something everybody thinks about.
In fact, the single cheapest and most effective thing you can do to have longevity is have a really healthy grandmother.
Absolutely.
I mean, really, it's a direct correlation. You have a grandmother who's just thriving and your mom was healthy, you're probably one of those people where you spark around and go, every now and then I get a little sick and I'm fine and stuff doesn't hurt and everything just works. You're probably going to live longer. Like, I had to work my ass off just to be at a baseline of health because I did not have that.
Right. Well, that's what keeps you, and you're the kind of person that pushes the envelope. You push, now I think I was saying to you earlier, the older I get, the less I know. But I've learned from you, so you learn from other people and you push it forward. But it's fascinating about the genetics part of it, right? So it isn't just, our heritability that causes longevity. Like it's not, all of that is not 100%. For example, there are certain genes that give us protection. Biologically, we're made to kind of reproduce and then die off. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So there's certain genes that protect us to get to a certain level. For example, it may get you enough to provide you safety from infection, et cetera, until you're like 40. So it assumes that you've already reproduced by then. And then it doesn't need you anymore biologically. It just cuts you off.
Mm.
And there's an advantage to that. Whereas if you're, maybe you're supposed to be infertile and be a caretaker and it gives you longevity, but it reduces your sperm count. So it's fascinating how the biology works. It really is, isn't it?
It's really fascinating. And if you take a fertile man and a fertile woman and you give them a diet that's high in toxins, low in protein, wrong kinds of fats and all of that, their hormones will decline and they'll become less healthy, and then their kids become less healthy.
That's correct.
I feel like one of the things that really affected the U.S. was Dr. Kellogg back in the day.
Yes.
Where he said, sexual desire is the root of all evil, so let's make a food that drops sexual desire. And it was low-fat, high-carb cornflakes. And like the guy was kind of a weirdo on multiple ways, but it got into our system where people have been doing that, especially in the 60s and 70s, Wheaties, Champions, and all that nonsense. It seems like the epigenetic effects of that 2-3 generations later are pretty meaningful.
Yeah, no, they're long-lived. I'll tell you, I'm guilty of it myself. When I was a young person,
Mm-hmm.
I used to watch TV, and you had to have your glass of orange juice in the morning.
Yeah.
Just probably the single most toxic thing you can do, right?
Right.
And you have the US FDA, you have all these people just kind of pushing the healthy breakfast. Breakfast is the most healthiest meal of the day, or the most important meal of the day, they would say. Which is complete poppycock, by the way. But the idea is that when you're taking in high levels of sugar, especially when you're a young person, right? Frosted Flakes or, Fruit Loops or whatever. And I don't want to mention particular brands, but the idea of a sugary meal, frankly.
Yeah.
So any of those type of things that would actually kind of be detrimental to you is the worst thing you can do. And the epigenetics of it, frankly, is that you're 100% right. What you're doing is that you're programming yourself to have weaker and weaker generations by changing who you're with. I mean, we know, and as you've written and said multiple times, the microbiome changes depending on what you're eating and what you're not, and what you're not eating, frankly.
Yeah. Do you think fecal matter transplants are going to be meaningful for longevity?
Interesting question. Yes, absolutely. And I'll tell you why I think they are. It sounds disgusting, right?
Yeah, I won't to try anything. After 15 years of antibiotics, like there's not much I wouldn't do.
Okay, so it's like going back to some of the basis of longevity is kind of like what your parents used to say. It's a company you keep. Okay, if you're with growing up in New York, people would say if you're with losers, you'll always be a loser. If you're with the winners, you'll be with the winner. But the same happens to us biologically, right? We are a cohort of people. If we're with healthy, like if you're hanging out with people that go to the gym all the time, it's been proven that the microbiome of you physically around you, it transfers to you. The same thing happens to young women. Women that go to college, they start menstruating together. It's a very the pheromones start they sync. So we think of ourselves as higher beings because we have intellect and we're having podcasts and we write books and all these types of things. But at the very nature, in many ways, we're animals. And biological, and that's not a derogatory term, and that's what we are. We're mammals, and that doesn't take any of the spirituality out of anything, but still, that's what we are biologically. And so the point of that is that you really need to be, you talk about fecal transplants, adding that stuff and getting that kind of gut, microbiome and things like that into you. If you're sick and you can't figure out other ways to do it, it makes a huge bit of difference.
It seems like it may be part of longevity, and I think the science is still pretty young on it. But AI is going to help us with the data. We've got companies like Viome out there they added 10,000 new species to the catalog of what lives in our guts that no one knew about, much less whether they make you live longer or not.
Right, absolutely. I mean, the amount of data that just to go through, I parsed through for this textbook with Dr. Katz. We had to take the most salient points, right? So one of the reasons that, conventional medicine, right? Like I said before, every doctor should be a longevity doctor, right? It's not something, I mean, what's the point of being a doctor if you're not trying to keep people alive as long as they can and as well as they can? There's so much data out there, and some of it's noise, but a lot of it isn't. And we don't realize, historically, we admire people generations later. Oh, the guy was a genius. We never knew. I'm hoping with the advent of AI, which is going to be another side effect, which we're not thinking, people like yourself are going to be admired in your own lifetime.
I think there'll always be at least 50% of people who are offended, and that's okay too, right? And if people choose to admire or not, as long as they got the information, like that's the thing.
No, but you're presenting it in a wonderful way and making people think about things that they, for example, as a conventional MD that goes through, being a professor and teaching and going through that process, learning those things from someone like you, frankly, hearing about things and kind of, processing it and kind of reevaluating something that you already thought you knew, I think is the best way to learn. I think one of the most incredible things in life, and this may not be a longevity point, but just a general point, is that you learn something and then you change your mind because you're like, maybe I'm wrong,
But the ability to be wrong without pain and suffering lowers your stress, and that means curiosity makes you live longer. It doesn't kill the cat.
There you go. And not only that, like I said to you before, the older I get, the less I know.
Yeah. You just realize some things that were dogmatic, strong beliefs. And the amount of change I've had in my life on the spiritual, emotional, psychological, even I used to believe if I don't have 6 meals a day, I'll go into starvation mode. I'm sitting there at 250, 300 pounds, thinking that if I stop eating, I'll starve. And the reality, in fact, in the studies that I couldn't see because I didn't want to think about it, was that I could go 3 or 4 months without eating and not die.
Right.
That was reality, but it felt so different. It feels like for most people listening, and this is, a special audience, the challenge of longevity is, number one, well, there's a lot of stuff I could do. What should I do? And we can probably boil that down pretty easily. But then how do I make myself actually do it? It's the patient compliance problem. How do you solve that with patients?
Okay, well, it's interesting that you say that. So, going back to medical school, we're taught teach patients don't smoke. Okay, just something that every doctor says, right?
Yeah.
Now, if you're, one of the biggest challenges is, right, when you're talking to people, young people, older people aren't stupid. If you just repeat the same thing again and again and without a reason, and you can't just say, oh, you're going to get cancer. Like that shouldn't be the reason, right? Because that's an unintellectual way of explaining why you shouldn't smoke. Okay. And this isn't about smoking, but I'm just making a point about getting information to a patient. So if someone is smoking, if you could say, by the way, your body temperature is 98.6 degrees and you're at this, you're taking a piece of paper, you're heating it up to a high temperature, you're inhaling, just imagine, when you get a temperature of 101 degrees, how bad you feel. You're shivering, you're not feeling great. Now you're taking toxic gases that are almost 200 degrees and you're inhaling them into your lungs because hot air rises and it burns up the alveoli in the top of your lungs and you get some, damage to your lungs. And if you kind of say, okay, and every time you do that, you're doing that, okay? So you can kind of intellect, you just say you're going to get cancer, you're going to die, it makes no sense. Now someone's thinking, So being informative, teaching people and talking to them, not as, like you said, up on a pedestal, but as an equal, right? Like being a physician, I think, is an incredible privilege. I mean, I've spent, decades doing it, talking to people, but the best part about being a physician is that it's a privilege to take care of people. I mean, what it's not a right, it's a privilege. And if you don't take it that way, and if you don't explain things the proper way, and if you don't treat them as an equal, then you're kind of being condescending. They're not going to trust you or believe you.
I've seen studies, just recent surveys, showing that public trust in the medical system and in doctors has gone from something like 80% to 30%. It's dropped precipitously in the last 5 years. What do you think is driving that?
Well, this whole pandemic, right? And it's been a very tough, process, I guess, because just inherently, right? And I'm not, again, not being political or being, incorrect by saying this, but you get multitude of information points, some correct and some incorrect, okay? And depends on how you take it, right? And your doctor tells you one thing, and then you kind of figure out, hey, this guy or gal that's telling you this, you're seeing physically the opposite of what's happening. And like I said, people aren't stupid. So they're going to be like, well, maybe the guy I'm listening to is the wrong guy or the wrong gal, and that is dangerous. I think one of the biggest challenges that's happened is that, especially during this pandemic, we were told what to do, because initially I think, people were scared out of their minds. They didn't know what to say. And then they said, instead of having a conversation about it, it was just like, you got to do it this way.
Some bullying.
Right, frankly. And that is not the way to, even if you're right, one of the biggest things about consensus, right? I know, people are like, oh, facts are facts. That is incorrect. You have to be able to talk to someone. Like I said, it's a privilege to take care of someone. So if you can't, if I have a bit of information that's going to save you, it's my duty to do it in a way to communicate it with you, not yell at you about it.
Yeah.
And that is the biggest challenge, and I don't know how to describe. AI can't do that part. Like you said, you can find whatever you want in AI, but you need to have someone that you can actually trust. And that's a big deal.
I've studied, what do you do when trust is violated? When you're looking at studying relationships, it's a thing that happens. And the normal, healthy human tribal thing is you apologize and make it right.
Right.
And because of insurance and politics and things that are not science, it's hard, even for doctors who maybe made a mistake or maybe were forced to do things, to just say, you know what? Like, we thought we knew what we were doing and we were wrong, and we're sorry about that. And if we could just have those healthy, normal human conversations, I think there would be more trust in medicine than there is today, because it's a scary place to be if you're someone who's sick and saying, well, I was going to go to the doctor, but now I'm pissed off at my doctor because, I just don't trust him anymore. You're helpless at that point. What do we do about that?
Well, it's interesting that you say that. One thing that I find fascinating is the power of saying, I don't know.
Oh my gosh, isn't that amazing?
Yeah, because, like I said, I'm a professor, I teach anatomy, I lecture, I write textbooks, but my most powerful words I think I can say, which is actually true, when somebody asks me a question, I have no idea what they're asking me. I'm like, dude, I just don't know. I wish I could tell you, I wish I could tell you, I just don't know. And then say, let's go back to smoking analogy, right? I'm not going to get cancer if I keep smoking. You know what? Statistically, probably yes, if you keep doing it for the next 30 years. But, the stuff that you're taking inside of you, like the nicotine, isn't terrible for you. In fact, it's somewhat protective against certain amounts of Alzheimer's disease.
I love it. You're saying this too. This is great.
So what's fascinating is that you can't be arrogant about things. Mm-hmm. You have to say, okay, you know what? That part, that nicotine actually gets you addicted to it, and you're taking a piece of paper, lighting it, and you're doing it this way. No, so you're addicted.
That's bad.
Yeah, that's bad, right? So you're addicted to this, okay? And this particular, it's an oral fixation. You also get used to doing something, and it's habitual people, but you're taking in something that possibly could be beneficial to you. Perhaps you cut out the other part, and let's talk about it intellectually, okay? And there's no debate about smoking. It's bad for you. However, when you don't know something, it's better to just be honest with someone and say, I have no idea. I'm sorry, I have no idea, but through my experience, this is what I think we should do, because I've done this before. Mm-hmm. But not to say, hey, I'm right, you're wrong, you're an idiot, and next.
Yeah, like, let's take your license because I disagree with you. That is such weird, toxic, McCarthyist behavior. And on the case of nicotine, I first heard about this, and I have a very detailed book on regenerating the brain because mine was trashed by toxic mold. Mm-hmm. So wrote this book called Headstrong, And the data on microdose pharmaceutical nicotine is pretty compelling. So I interviewed the guy from Vanderbilt University who did the first study in 1986 showing that low dose pharmaceutical nicotine, but not smoking, reversed or prevented Alzheimer's disease. And it wasn't just one paper. He's done dozens of them.
Right. Yeah.
And so, but every time I say that, 90% of people go, Dave Asprey said you should smoke. I'm like, did you not hear the words? How do you handle patients when you tell them something, but they hear something else?
So, what I don't do though is that when I talk to people, it's more like, like the way we're speaking now. See, one of the problems right now with medicine in general, and it's not like doctors are bad or evil. We have a limited amount of time, okay? And it's a very corporate world. You're seeing like 50 people in your waiting room and you're getting paid $25 to see them. Mm-hmm. Your overhead is this. You're just like, you're getting killed. It's not easy to be a doctor. So it's not the doctor's fault. So you're getting stressed out and you have to keep your numbers up and you don't have time.
Right.
Before you would sit and you could see, back, I remember being younger, your doctor actually knew who you were. Mm. They knew your name. You didn't see somebody different every time you went to see the doctor for the most part. You weren't a client. You weren't, you were Dave, that knew you, how you doing? How's your mom? Like things that actually mattered to you. And they knew that you did, there's a great scene in this movie. And again, I'm a big Michael J. Fox fan. And I saw this movie, Doc Hollywood. I don't know if you remember that.
I remember Doc Hollywood. Yeah.
And do you remember? I mean, this is a weird scene where he's driving through, and he breaks down in this little town, and he sees a young boy who's cyanotic, who's blue, and he wants to operate on his heart. And the other doctor gives the kid a bottle of Coke, and the kid's fine because he had chewed some chalk or something like that.
Dr. Holt said you should give the boy a Coke.
What?
He said he's probably got a bellyache and that you should give him a Coca-Cola.
That'll be 65 cents.
So the idea of, and it sounds like a hokey story, but that art of medicine is lost in what people are doing, and being a doctor, like I said, is a privilege. Listening is so important, and kind of figuring out where that person's coming from, what their needs are. We just, unfortunately, people just don't seem to have the time for this anymore, I don't know if there's just, it's funny, we talk about a negative population decline, but it seems like we have less and less time, even though there, seems to be a lot of healthcare providers.
Well, you're a doctor and you have some high profile patients and you're running an AI imaging company, Rad Sherpa, and you do a lot of stuff. How do you manage your time?
Very poorly. You ask my wife or my kids, I'm like up early, I'm running around, I have 4 boys, and my oldest is in college, so I'm driving around most of the day. What I do is that my favorite, it's fascinating, my favorite parts of my day are, taking my kids. They're always late to school. I hope my kids aren't listening to this, but we're driving them to school, 3 of them getting them in the car, driving them, barely making it if on time, and then, going there to pick them up a little bit late. And kind of doing that type of thing. I cherish those moments, and being a dad, being a husband is like one of my greatest joys, more than, being a physician or doing anything else. I enjoy just being around my kids and my wife, and it's a lot of fun, and I just enjoy myself. And then work is I'm not stressed out. I mean, it's, I talk to people, but I talk to them, I have conversations with them, and they have conversations back with me. And when it's important, I make time for them, and they make time for me, and they respect my time. So I'd love, and I'm honored to have that kind of relationship where I can actually talk to people. I wanted to get back to the point about epigenetics for a second, okay? This is a very, very important point. So what we did in this textbook, right? Or I don't want to call it a text. This book is not written for just doctors, right? It's written. Like I gave it to one of my twins, he just turned 15 2 days ago, to read. Right now when I teach students or residents or whatever, I can't keep anyone's attention for more than 15 minutes, okay? Right. So I know we're going to be on the air for, perhaps over an hour, but hopefully we're captivating their attention, because the average person can't get a complex concept for more than 15 minutes now.
Wow.
And when you're teaching medical students and residents, anatomy or physiology or important things, I can't do a TikTok dance, right? I mean, I have to keep their attention, and I have to
Supposed to everyone's protection, man.
no, but the good thing now is that they can pause, because many things are, recorded. They can pause me, and they can do their own TikTok dance and watch my dance, I guess, at the end, and keep going. But I think we were able to successfully parse that information to the general public is what is my goal, because what I wanted to do was to say, hey, we're talking about epigenetics, right? Why exercise? Why diet? How do these things, how does senescent cells work? All the different things that you need to know of why you're doing what, okay? Why do we, listen to Dave Asprey, and why do we do everything he says? Why? And those whys are questions. Does it just work for everyone? And we try to give a scientific reason, an intelligent reason. This is what we're trying to accomplish. And I think epigenetics is a big, big piece of that.
It's a huge piece of it. And in the field of epidemiology, we're saying, well, let's look at, 1 million people and what they do and what we think they do. And let's say, well, everyone should do what they do because they got this result, even though we don't have causation or any science there. I find that that's a little bit scary. And with epigenetics, it gets even more scary. So the biohacking approach is, well, let's look at epigenetics. Let's hypothesize what's probably going to work for you. And let's measure some results. And if it doesn't work, you just stop and you do something else. My mistake when I was younger was I just was so sure that I knew what was going to work if I could just do more of it. And, going to the gym 90 minutes a day, 6 days a week, and the low fat, low calorie eating all the time and all that stuff, it made me worse until I kind of couldn't go anymore. And if I had known, here's how to do lab work, here's how to track my recovery, I would have seen in a month, oh, I'm on the wrong track. And for most people listening, if you want to get a medical lab test, you have to go to the doctor, hope the doctor knows the test you want to get, and will say yes. And there's a lot of doctors who will say, you don't need it, you're too young. It's like, that wasn't my question. In fact, why am I even asking for this? I should be able to just order it at home. And I want to come in when I have a problem and I know my numbers are off and I want help with them. And do you see a shift in the permission slip culture around lab testing?
Around this time of year, you might notice your skin is dry or dull or irritated. It's because cold weather disrupts your skin barrier. And that's the shield that keeps moisture in and environmental stress out. If your skin barrier gets disrupted, you can get accelerated aging in your skin. The longevity scientists at OneSkin have a solution with their skincare products. They developed a new peptide called OS1 that works at the cellular level to strengthen your skin's barrier. In lab and clinical studies, their skincare products OS1 Eye, OS1 Face, and OS1 Body increased skin barrier function and improved hydration for those different kinds of skin. Those are the two most important signs of stronger, more resilient skin. OS1 is also proven scientifically to reverse skin's biological age. And that works by targeting zombie cells in your skin that can cause wrinkles or sagging or thin skin. If you're into longevity and you want your skin to look like you're into longevity, check it out. oneskin.co/Asprey and use code Asprey15. That'll give you 15% off your first order. Stuff works.
Armra colostrum is a must-have. This isn't just another supplement. It is colostrum, which is upgraded to boost your immune system and your gut health. Armra is great because it comes from first milking colostrum, which means it has more than 200 functional nutrients. That includes immunoglobulins, growth factors, and peptides that specifically protect your gut lining. You can expect cellular defense and energy on a new level. Since I've added Armra to my stack, I've definitely seen faster recovery, especially during travel, better immune resilience, and more mental clarity. Clinical studies show that colostrum reduces gut inflammation and supports muscle mass. And it turns out I have both of those, but my gut inflammation is far better than it used to be. This is nature's original superfood. It's potent, it's clean, and I think you want to try it. Head to tryarmra.com and use code Dave. They'll give you 15% off.
I do, and one of the projects I had started with pure mammography was which I no longer own, was to able to democratize that. It was in retail centers, and I'm working on an interesting project as well now in the medical retail space, where the idea is that Like, just think about, we'll talk about imaging and laboratory for a second, okay? Like you just nailed it on the head. Most people are working, they're doing their thing, and they have to go to see their doctor during the hours of 8 to 3, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and they're off on Thursday and Friday, whatever, some random schedule. To me, if you want good health, it should be available when the person that needs that health is available. So to me, laboratory and imaging should be open and accessible when people are off of work.
Yeah.
So if you want an MRI, and it sounds like such a simple concept, but it should be open at 11:30 at night, because maybe you have to work all day long and you have to pay for that MRI or whatever. I mean, God forbid, right? Why should you be economically punished for healthcare? Yeah. Same thing with labs. You're absolutely right? I mean, this is a sticky situation, because if you're getting labs covered through insurance, then I can understand the insurance company, it's a different way of thinking. But if you're willing to pay for your labs, then the doctor you should be able to get information about your own body and analyze it how you want to be able to do it. You shouldn't have to go to a gatekeeper who keeps saying no to you.
Yeah. It's one of the projects I've been working on. I'm part of Upgrade Labs, which is the franchise around AI and longevity that we've got now 32 locations in the process of opening. There's Axo.health, which is our platform. You can order the basic lab panels and someone comes to your house, even in the evening, and draws blood, at least in most states, depending. And that's like a small way to say, at least you've got the numbers. And then you need to schedule an appointment because your numbers are out of the range, right? And we'll tell you, well, here's the supplements that might move it in range. You can do it yourself. And I feel like we're at this interesting place where, 40 years ago, you got a leak in your sink, you call a plumber and they come over and it was affordable and they'd fix it. And now most people say, well, I'll just go to YouTube and then I'll go to Home Depot and I'll just fix it because it's so much more affordable. And the whole DIY movement's happening. Well, DIY for your longevity, which may highlight a medical problem that you would then enter the medical system for, it feels like we're right at the cusp of that. And that's why I was asking earlier about the relationship with patients, because you want a trusted doctor to work with on that stuff. You just don't want to schedule an appointment if nothing's wrong.
Right.
Do you think insurance companies are going to stay the same?
Well, there's such a financial incentive for you to be able to, the answer to that question, let me go back to what I said before. I don't know. I don't know, but I'll say this. What I think is going to happen is that I think it's going to be incredibly problematic when these lab tests and these things are going to, as a function of time, they're going to get less and less expensive and less expensive and less expensive. For example, right now, like an MRI machine costs $1.5 million. If you go to a cash paying place, go to the US, if you go to a non-hospital place MRI facility, you pay about $350. That's it, not thousands of dollars for MRIs anymore. Okay. So the price of these things have come down significantly. So if you went to a hospital and it's owned by the hospital, they charge like $2 or $3 grand. But for just if you just want a knee MRI, it's like $350. If that.
Look at a knee or something.
Yeah, whatever. So there's been democratization of laboratory that's happening the same way. The cost of these things are starting to come down significantly, and the lab equipment, the diagnostic equipment, is coming down significantly both in price and availability. Now, you still can't buy an MRI machine for your own house, but now the wearables, you're getting some of that information, in a different way, right?
Yeah. It feels like it's going to keep coming down. There's some cutting edge stuff that it feels like we don't understand, like around joint misalignment. What are some of the imaging technologies that are really good at telling someone, here's what's going on?
So interestingly enough, in terms of actually analyzing joints, which is what I have done most of my career, you can do an anatomic. There's different ways to look at it, right? At least from an imaging point of view, you have three major characteristics. So you can look at the anatomy of it incredibly with high detail with a 3-test MRI. You can look at every ligament, everything, looking at it in real time. The good thing about that is it gives you incredible anatomic detail. But I tell people all the time, and this is going back to, where we're talking about with insurance companies and doctors. So when you look at a knee MRI, it's like looking at a car in a parking lot, okay? If somebody comes with knee pain and you have a code to its normal MRI, right? It looks perfectly normal, like anatomically. It does it, you know, this is a classic thing, you know, physicians, and I'm guilty of this myself, so I'm not, you know, acting like I'm different from anyone else. Oh, you know, our gut feeling is oh, that guy's nuts. He's complaining for no reason.
Yeah.
So there's a functional part of it, right? I mean, the functional part is that maybe the patella, when they bend the knee, I'm looking at a static image. So it's like looking at a car in the parking lot, right? You can look at the car, you can see that it has 4 wheels, you know it's parked in the parking lot, it's probably going to run. But we don't know if there's any gas in the car.
Mm-hmm.
We don't know if something's wrong, there's a spark plug. We can't see the functional aspect of it. We're looking at an anatomic aspect of it, and we're making an incredible leap towards something functional. And currently, for the most part, I mean, you could do weight-bearing x-rays, you could do musculoskeletal ultrasound, which shows you, I wrote a whole book on that, on dynamic ways of looking at the knee joint. But most people, because we just don't, you know, like the art of the physical exam, when the doctor, remember, doctors used to touch you, you know?
Mm-hmm.
They used to feel your knees, or they would move, you know.
They feel if it's creaky and move.
That's correct. They would actually spend time with you, right? Like that physical exam, you know, there are textbooks and books written on this stuff, right? Wow. Now it's completely gone now, practically, because, you know, when I first started training, you know, even though I'm a radiologist, I don't really examine patients that much. It was such an art. The old doctors that I would be like, wow, they figured out so much just by talking to the patient, putting the ear up against the chest, or, you know, just using the stethoscope.
And the old tapping to like figure out the sound of the tissues is a lost art now.
When's the last time you saw anyone do that?
Yeah.
It's very, very, you know, they're like, okay, get a CAT scan of your chest, get an MRI of your knee, and see you later.
Wow.
You know, and that's what's happened. And that's why people are losing faith. Not the doctor's fault, because the system is made to do that. The corporate system is made to do that.
Okay. I've seen some stuff in your book about weight-bearing CT scans versus laying down.
Mm-hmm.
And what is that doing for pro athletes and others who have just chronic pain?
So again, functional imaging, right? So the idea of actually, you know, when you're getting imaging done with the actual weight standing up, you can see the imaging that's being done on patients in a way that their joint mobility works or doesn't work. Again, you have to listen to the patient, right? Because if, like I said, if you just look at a stagnant picture one way and the patient still has pain, the fault doesn't lie with the patient, it lies with you, because you haven't found the problem. Nobody, in my opinion, for the most part, people are working, you know, I usually, like when somebody's in the waiting room and then they're coming to me to do an ultrasound and check out their knee, if they took time off from work, pay the copay, or waiting for me to talk to them and scan their knee, there's something wrong. And if I say it's normal, it may be normal anatomically, means I'm missing something.
Yeah, because the patient still isn't, it's like it hurts.
That's right. We haven't figured out the problem, you know?
Up until my late 20s, it actually felt like there was a candle burning between my shoulder blades, like really strong pain all the time. And then, you know, the arthritis, the knee surgeries, I just thought it was supposed to hurt when you walked, because it always hurt my entire life. I played soccer, I did all the things. I'm like, it's just what you do. Because I had misalignment. I was duck-footed as a kid. I was eating foods that caused joint inflammation for me. I lived in toxic mold. Like I did everything wrong. So being able to heal joints is a big deal for me. And there's sort of 3 technologies that are available, and you've worked with all of them. So I want you to give me the short version. We got PRP, we got exosomes, and we've got stem cells. How do you know when to use which one?
Okay, an excellent question. So I actually, one of my colleagues who's an excellent physician at the Hospital for Special Surgery in New York, Dr. Vijay Vad, he's an expert on, you know, doing these type of procedures. And, you know, just as I am, we inject a lot of these patients. PRP is just like taking your blood, spinning it down. It's like, you know, actually there's 4 options. So there's the option, which I'm not a fan of, which is just taking steroids and injecting in it, which kind of weakens your, you know, that's what conventional medicine does. If you have insurance, you're not getting PRP, exosomes, or stem cells. You're just getting, you know, steroids. It's going to make you feel better immediately, but it's going to weaken your muscle. It's going to damage your joint and all those other things.
You're getting a bonus too, though. You get to spend 12 hours on the phone with the insurance company for them to tell you they're not going to pay for that either.
That's right. Exactly right. Absolutely right. And it's the worst thing for you. It makes you fatter. Yeah. It deconditions your muscle around you, and it really doesn't do that much for you. Okay. Now, platelet-rich plasma. If you're on Wikipedia, you'll see my picture from a couple of decades ago. I was doing this, one of the first people not the first, but one of many, but one of the first people to do it clinically. And the whole book was about classification and how to do it, taught it. PRP is a quick, inexpensive way to treat, they're like grades, right? I mean, it's really an economic question, I think.
So it is.
Yeah.
I'm glad you said that.
Because what happens is that PRP should be inexpensive.
It's about $1,000 at the average provider.
Yeah, between $500 to $1,000, right?
Okay.
Exosomes is about $2,000. Now, the interesting thing about exosomes are, depending on what part of the country, depending on the jurisdiction, some of them it's not allowed, like there's a whole gray zone about them.
Yeah, it's weird. Like someone out there thinks they can tell me what I get to put in my body. It's the weirdest thing.
Well, yeah, it's the FDA, and that's the way it works. What's fascinating is that in certain jurisdictions, like in Antigua and other places around the world where they have these, laws where you can actually have a stem cell injection where, where you can have, the laws allow you to have it. So two things. One is jurisdictionally speaking, in the United States, PRP is allowed. It's legal. Most of your doctors are doing it. It's a first line of therapy in the regenerative space. Mm-hmm. But in order to do it, your body has to be well. So these are the contraindications for people for PRP, in my opinion. One is that if you're older, your platelets aren't going to be as good as when you were younger, okay? The second is that if you're in chronic therapy, let's say you have cardiac disease and you're on certain types of medications that make your platelets weaker, probably not the best thing for you. And if you have severe arthritis, it really isn't going to do that much for you, in my opinion, okay? So, but it still works. It's a go-to, and it's legal in the U.S. The second step up is the exosome. So there are people that debate about whether exosomes really, the term exosome is an interesting term. I've been doing cell and molecular biology for the last decade, growing stem cells, and the milieu. So exosomes are the, I have a funny New York City term for this. They're the hot dog water of the stem cell word.
I always call it stem cell poop, but hot dog water is even better.
Yeah, because what it is that the food is the hot dog. You boil the hot dog. At least used to be when you go to New York, you'd have a lot of hot dog carts. And if you look at that water, it's a little dirty, it's a little grimy, but that water is fascinating because, and the exosome, like saying, exosomes generically is a tough thing to say, because what ends up happening is that exosomes, it's like saying, like food, the word food, right? It's like donut is a food, and so is broccoli, okay? So the exosomes are really dependent on what type of stem cells are being grown, okay? So this is fascinating, and this is, come back to, I'll talk about red light therapy, talk about sound. If you're growing stem cells, the exosomes are the growth factors that they release, okay? Mm-hmm. So fascinatingly enough, if you add a certain sound, like being from Eastern culture, certain sounds like certain megahertzes of sound, or frequencies of sound, I should say frequencies, they actually cause the stem cells to release different things.
Yeah, even ultrasound will do it. And for listeners, there's a reason you hum. There's a reason that music can be healing. And now we have cell biology and stem cells changing in response to music.
Well, no, it's fascinating. So I'm not a guy that would ever believe this. Like, I'm the guy, I'm not the guy that would be like, that's not me. Okay. And I'm not the guy into light therapy or sound or meditation. But when I physically saw this from a biologic point of view, if you add red light to stem cells, they produce different things. Vitamin C, they produce different things. You add different things to the milieu of that hot dog water, right? You're making a different soup. So it's very important. So if you're putting in a crappy hot dog in the first place, it's going to give off bad hot dog juice, right? Mm-hmm. If it's processed, it's not good. So the stem cells matter, and the stuff that's in it matters. So it's a big, big deal.
Wow. Okay, so we've got PRP cheap and reasonably effective, and I think PRP is best for tendons and ligaments, right?
That's correct. Exactly.
Okay.
The insertion of the bone into a muscle, and the attachment, which are the tendons, it's ideal for tendons. And then steps ligaments next, and then also into the joint space to bring down inflammation.
Okay. And what are exosomes best for?
So I just misspoke. I said to bring down inflammation. So they cause the opposite thing. The PRP actually causes inflammation, okay? Exosomes are the greatest anti-inflammatory I've ever seen, okay? So what they do is both, and they're used for everything from aesthetics to joint. Like, for example, if you have a patient with really bad synovitis, or which is just a fancy word for inflammation of your knee joint because of rheumatoid arthritis or some type of disorder, if you put exosomes in that, and if you do the proper type, your inflammation reduces. I've never seen reduction of inflammation as quick as I have seen with exosomes. And the exosomes, but the key is you have to use the right exosomes. The exosomes that are from the right type of stem cell, the exosomes that don't have any. So what happens is, just getting back to the hot dog water thing, right? If you're using pure water, it's just water. But what people are doing is that they're using like bovine growth serum, or like, they're using they're using, if you get stem cells and you feel like shivery or shaky, or if you get some of these things, one of the things, or they have to add steroid to what you're doing, sometimes that's because they're using animal products.
Ooh, you don't want animal stem cells.
No.
Those aren't animal stem cells. They're just animal products that were in the medium to grow.
That's correct.
Okay.
So I'm not saying that's true for every single one, but there's something called phenolphthalein, which is, remember, when you're in high school chemistry class.
It's X-Lax.
Yeah, exactly. You drop it, it turns blue or pink, depending on whether it's an acid or base. And it's an inexpensive way for many of these labs to see if something's infected, because if it goes from pink to blue, then it's infected. That's the poor man's way of looking at it. But if you're more advanced, you're using, a flow cytometer and using genetic analysis for infection, you don't need any of that stuff, and you have more pure product. So if you use that type of stuff, which is kind of, what we've been using clinically, primarily outside the United States, primarily in Antigua, if you're injecting that type of stuff, the inflammation and that stuff is so much better than anything I've ever seen. And the sad thing is most clinicians or physicians don't even know what the stuff is. They don't know what makes it out.
What exosomes are.
They just don't know.
And they also, there's a lot of different companies. Some do really well and some don't. And I feel like the U.S. is maybe the worst place to get exosomes, because there's a lot of gray zone stuff around it too. And when I've been able to go to other countries where physicians have more freedom, the quality of the exosome seems higher. And there are, to be clear, there's some friends who have very good stem cells in the U.S., very good exosomes in the U.S. But if you're just going to a random clinic and they're like, oh, it's, $350 a month and we'll give you some stem cells, like, those are not good stem cells. And if they're exosomes, those are not good exosomes, because it costs more than that to make good ones.
That's absolutely right. So if you're playing in the gray zone, right, you don't know what you're getting. What's fascinating is that when you start analyzing what's actually in there, I took a deliberate, what's interesting about the United States with cell and molecular biology is that to analyze placentas and things like that, in the US, you can't discriminate, which sounds like an amazing thing, but it's actually counterintuitive. So American-made products, people say, I want American-made stem cells. In the US, if I get a placenta from anyone, whatever socioeconomic group, whatever part of the country, I have to use it. I can't discard it. It's sort of like, so look, it's biological material. So when you go outside the US, if you think about it, you can do more screening.
So you can't just pay for the thing and throw it away? You have to just use it?
No. So what happens is that, like, you can't say, I want, again, I'm not trying to be politically incorrect, but you can't say, I want this type of, like, let's say,
like healthy and young.
Yeah. Yes. You can't arbitrarily choose.
Wow.
And you can't say, it's just, if you think about it, sort of discriminatory, but healthcare is discriminatory. So if you go outside the US, you can get, in my opinion, again, this is my opinion, you can get much, much better stem cells than you could ever get in the United States, because there's a huge amount of, like there's like 3 or 4 companies that sell placentas and they just mix them up. You don't know what you're getting.
I am really uncomfortable with placental cells in the U.S. I have done them outside the U.S. I won't do them in the U.S. I've seen too many bad effects from it.
Yeah, and I agree with that. And I don't think it's allowed, except it's not really allowed. So the people that are doing it are kind of, they're in that gray zone. And when you're in the gray zone, sometimes you cut corners.
Yeah. I have done my own stem cells in the U.S., but now I leave the U.S. I've done a few podcasts, like with Vince Giampati.
Yes, yeah.
About my experiences down there. And having done every joint in my body with my own stem cells in the U.S., it was like a truck hitting me. It was one of the most miserable things ever in Utah. And it did work, but it was rough. And I have a high pain tolerance. And when I use properly created stem cells, I don't have nearly the same reaction.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll tell you something else which is interesting. Parabiosis, which I think Dr. Jean Papa was talking about when he was on your podcast, which is a fascinating concept of using, young, plasma transfer. So what I've been doing, the research and the work I've been doing is that we've been taking some progenitor cells like from your fat and mixing it with exosomes to see if there's any changes in the Yamanaka factors. There's 4 of them, and you can actually change the age of that stem cell. Now the problem is that if I took your fat cells or your bone marrow cells, you can get just a small amount of cells.
Right.
Right. It's in the tens of thousands and thousands. Right. Like there are companies out there that are not promoting bone marrow cells, which I think especially if it's not from you and from someplace else, it's a huge mistake.
I have 2 billion of my own marrow cells banked so that I can do those procedures.
Now, see, that's great because they're your cells. And if you take somebody else's marrow cells,
Sure.
not a great idea.
That's insane.
Yeah.
And there's a lot you can do when you leave the U.S. We'll put it that way.
Yeah, absolutely.
Go down to Antigua and you need to do advanced
Yeah,
procedures.
yeah. So we do a lot of stuff in Antigua.
And just for listeners and who's, maybe you're a regulator listening, guys, you're destroying the U.S. medical system and economy by not allowing these things to work. We go to Abu Dhabi, we go to Thailand, we go to Antigua, we go to Costa Rica, we go to Cabo San Lucas, and the U.S. gets no money from that. It's the dumbest thing I ever heard of. Like, get out of the way and let patients sign a waiver and let doctors do their thing. I'm getting kind of pissed about that.
It's fascinating because I help with some legislation for some other places with it being intentionally vague. What happens is that I think in one of your podcasts, I forgot which one, you were talking about the freedom to try and healthcare, et cetera. And I think it is so important. These smaller, let's be honest, right? People aren't going to these countries for the incredible medical infrastructure. Some of the best doctors are here in the U.S.
Yeah.
So we've taken and created a system where we're taking intelligent doctors from major institutions and forcing them to go overseas to do procedures. Not because they're greedy, not because they're evil, but because they're not allowed to go do some of these things. We should be able to do clinical trials in the U.S. without. It's a huge amount of cost of doing some of these clinical trials, right? They say, okay, there's not great data on stem cells or exosomes or PRP. People will say all those things. Now, when I first started doing PRP, there wasn't great data on it. And that was 20-something years ago, and people were saying detracting. And now there is great data on it.
It's weird how there's never great data on new things. By definition?
Right, of course. And then we should be able, as long, primum non nocere. First thing they teach you in medical schools is first do no harm.
Unless you're thalidomide.
But the gestalt of what we're saying is that, we need to put together a medical infrastructure that doesn't make physicians criminals.
There you go.
Right? And you should be able to control what you want to do, especially, God forbid, you're really, really sick, right? Why should you have to go to Latin America for a medical procedure? It makes no sense.
Not at all.
You should be able to say, listen, this person is dying, and let's do this, okay? I don't want to get, the hospital doesn't want to get sued. This doesn't happen. Suing is not, if somebody's on their last legs, and they're willing to try anything, and as long as a person is not taking advantage of them by charging them some ridiculous amount of money, let them try.
Yeah. If at some point in my journey to live to past 180, I want to try something and I'm near death and they just won't let me try it, I'm going to invite the regulator in to have a conversation with me while I'm wearing an explosive vest. Because that way I'm going to do a solid for the world. Is that a good strategy? Okay, I'm not really going to do that.
I'm not going to touch that one.
But seriously, it's not the doctors, it's not the care providers, it's the people who sit there and say, I'm going to decide from my fucking ivory tower with my, big mallet that you're not allowed to control your own biology. And I'm getting really tired of that because it's a sacred right that is part of being alive. And I didn't sell it to my government. It's not in the Constitution. And these clowns just don't have a right. And I trust physicians, I trust science, and I even will listen to recommendations from the government. I also know that they're wrong a lot. So all of those are good information sources, but who's going to block it? You have to be mean-spirited. If you got someone who's dying and desperate, you could take advantage of them, right? But if you're so afraid of that you just create suffering, then that's not okay either.
No, I agree. The thing is that if you actually allowed it to happen, then people had choices where they can go, the cost would dramatically decrease and nobody would be taking advantage of, right? And, I have to blame, and this is including my cohort, physicians for some of these problems. What we don't do is we don't pay attention. When these laws aren't just random laws, they're passed. And, it's easy to ignore things. You can use and we are busy and we're distracted, but it's time to try to, go through this. Like, it's not an us versus them. We can actually try to change some of these things. And if enough people got together and actually actively lobbied for it, the problem is that, many people in the medical field are frenemies, right? They don't want to see someone else succeed. And again, I'm not being mean-spirited by saying that. It's just a fact, So if your colleague wants to try something and he or she thinks that's amazing, why not? Why not?
Yeah. You also have the physicians trade union involved, the American Medical Association, that may have some partnerships with the pharmaceutical industry. I've heard as much, right? And sometimes I would say people who are not healers, but who are administrators in medicine will do things like what we see with prescription glasses, where in most of the world, if you need a prescription, you're going to get glasses and they're cheap. But here, because you might have an eye problem, to force you to get an eye exam, in the US, you have to have a prescription for your glasses. And it's just creating a lot of work for optometrists, right? And it's great if you're an optometrist because you have guaranteed income so people can buy glasses, but it's terrible for glasses. Stuff like that. Like, there's all systemic fixes. And my hope is at some point soon that we actually just ask AI and has enough data and say, what's a streamlined system? Like, let's just re-envision what the future looks like, where what matters is, have we reduced suffering and have we extended health and extended life in humans? And how do we do it so that everyone gets paid what they need to get paid so that they have a healthy living? I think we can do it. Do you think that's possible?
Absolutely. It's interesting. I took my son to El Salvador this summer for a mission trip. We went and my son, he's only 17, and we were doing this eyeglass thing, and it was fascinating because there were people just waiting for glasses, right? And I forgot the name of this machine, but it was just a plastic pair of goggles, and you just kind of twist it, and it gives you your right prescription. It took a short amount of time,
Cool.
and you popped in the lenses. There were people waiting in line to get glasses, and you would think, we're doing some incredible. We're giving away, like, this is free, and this was just it was done out of love. There's no charge. It was just it's a charity.
Yeah.
It was a gift. And, that part of medicine, the idea of just giving, right? Not for any secondary gain. You talk about joy. You talk about the portion of the epigenetics of joy. That is an incredible feeling, right? People couldn't see, now they can. They're happy, and it was free.
Wow.
I mean, that brought joy, And I wish we had more of that here. And there's an incredible amount of need here in the U.S. And, and there are people that are obviously helping and doing the things, but I wish we can do it more freely without being kind of legislated out of being able to do it.
And I'm actually really hopeful that we'll move in that direction, partly just because systems collapse under their own weight. And the insurance industry and the whole medical system in the U.S., everybody knows at this point. So people are opting out and they're saying, I'm just going to do the DIY thing.
Right. Yeah. No, that's what's happening. And if we're not relevant, right? So the problem is that, belong to some great academic institutions. We risk, as physicians, the danger of becoming irrelevant. Because what will happen, and it is happening now. So, like, I'll just give you a little blurb about the company that I'm, rad sure about.
Yeah.
So you can go online, and it's you can pop in an X-ray, and it'll start, reading it. What's happening now is that it's not going to happen. AI is not going to. The revolution is not. The user base isn't going to happen primarily in the U.S. because there's a huge FDA regulation. It's going to happen outside the U.S. because let's say you're in Bangladesh or India or Thailand or Nigeria or wherever. and you don't have access to musculoskeletal radiologists like myself, and now you can just pop in the thing and you can get the result immediately. It has a real benefit. It's low cost or almost free, if not free right now. And it gives you an accurate information to a knowledge base that you would never have before. And I'll tell you something else which is fascinating about AI. We used to have, historically, we used to have these city-states, and especially, after the fall of the Roman Empire. And we're going to see, if you go to small little countries, right, they're very unified, they do everything together, but they lack a knowledge base to be able to do things. Like, for example, if you want to build a big bridge in a Caribbean country, you may not have the best civil engineer in the world, okay? So what AI does is it gives you the ability to give you technical information, and you can control it yourself with your own, you're going to see smaller places punch way above their weight.
Oh, for sure.
In everything. Militarily, from civil engineering. In fact, AI is a issue of national security for the United States. And, and I'm hoping, as an American, that we treat it more intelligently than the way we're doing. We invest more in it here, and we kind of, go with it.
I certainly hope that it reshapes the field of medicine so doctors are less bored. They have more time with patients. Patients are better informed. They don't go to the doctor when they don't need to. And I'm feeling pretty excited about it. But the one area that seems to be the hardest right now is musculoskeletal injuries. I've talked to so many people who have, a shoulder injury. I've got a subscapular thing over here that's just been a pain in the ass. I've had it injected multiple times, but I think I moved too quickly or something afterwards. It never quite heals. And I'm not alone in that. A lot of people who've done CrossFit and all have similar injuries. And these are the things where, it hurts, but it moves around and there's a knot here and all of that. And you go in and they try all sorts of different things. What kind of imaging works best for musculoskeletal stuff?
So I find that ultrasound, joint ultrasound, just taking a probe, putting it right where it hurts, looking to see where it hurts, and that still can't be done by a computer or an AI, but it kind of, I'm hoping that we evolve into, from the physical exam into the visual physical exam, where you're actually looking to see where the joints are, where the joint capsule inserts, if there's calcification. I was one of the first people to start teaching all this stuff, back in the early 2000s, musculoskeletal ultrasound. And I find that, I used to do all these workshops, and many of my students now have become, leaders in the field in this. And that's all, as a teacher, that's all you can hope for. You hope that the people that you teach end up being much better than you. And I'm hoping...
You made a difference with that.
Yeah, and I'm hoping that people that listen to this podcast and listen to the things we're talking about, take some inspiration from some of the things we're saying and just really run with it and far supersede anything that, any individual can do. The same way, when you look at joints and you look for joint pain and things like that, the ability to palpate, touch, and then also see, which is an incredible amount of, a knowledge that we can glean. With joints, it's not so simple as just, see, there's two different parts of joints, right? We talk about what we're used to is injuries. The U.S., because we're a surgical world, we talk about injuries.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? We talk about tears, we talk about that. But there are other diseases, such as rheumatologic diseases, which are underdiagnosed, where you have, like an autoimmune disorder, which affects your joint space. And those people don't need surgery, and to be able to diagnose that. And those people possibly, need good nutrition, or they need hormonal replacement, and those types of things. So it's an interesting, it's a eclectic point of view.
It is. And as someone who did have arthritis, I just got to say, if you're listening to this and your joints hurt all the time, and it's not just one joint, it's either autoimmune or you don't know how to eat and you're eating a bunch of foods with oxalate. Those are almost certainly the two things, and maybe lectins, which is still autoimmune.
Well, it's interesting you say that. A good friend of mine who's a nutritionist, he's like the best nutritionist I know. His name is David Allen. He's out in California. Oxalate, big deal. There's oxalate deposition. There's like different types. There's pseudogout. There's calcium pyrophosphate deposition inside the joint spaces. It's a metabolic problem, right? And there are people that like David who are just incredibly talented. The good thing about this is that, working on this book, I get to meet people like Chris Sander, who's a incredible specialist in hormone replacement, all these different types of people. And these are not the only, the good thing is that there are some wonderful people that are, doing these things, and they're not the only ones, right? But they're all kind of working together. And, depending on which part of the country you're in, you can find somebody just as wonderful as the people I just mentioned.
It's entirely possible to find good help on that. But if it's one joint that hurts all the time, and you look at imaging, you look at functional movement, and ultrasound is a great way to do it. And I actually felt like strangely validated because I had this thing in my shoulder a long time ago, and I was like, I'll just, work it off. And I keep trying to, lift, but it's not working. And then, you go in with an ultrasound, you go, oh, look, there's a tear right here, and you can really see it. And that's really cool. I think I have a video of doing that with Dr. Adele Khan. And it's real, right?
Yeah,
so
there's a tear, there it is, and there's a picture's worth 1,000 words.
Yeah.
And also, one of the challenges is that when you hurt and you get the MRI or whatever, and it comes back normal, it's disheartening to you. And, the doctor's like, all right, next, all right, there's nothing wrong with
the MRI is not going to show the tear.
That's right. Of course not, because it's a functional, we're talking about, like I said, look at that car parked in the parking lot. It may not run because it doesn't have gas. You have to be able to move it around. You got to see it drive. You got to take it for a test drive. And that's a functional. Anatomic is just looking at the car. Functional is driving the car.
So the takeaway for listeners is that if you got something going on, you can get an MRI for a lot cheaper now than you could before, and it might show you what's going on, and it's useful. And I'm a huge fan of whole body MRIs with AI. But then you might want to get an ultrasound view of it from what kind of doctor do you go to for that?
Well, I mean, it's your sports medicine doctor who does, and the great thing about this is it's multiple specialties. You have the radiologist, you have the physiatrist, you have the anesthesiologist, you have the pain, medicine and rehab physiatrist, orthopedic surgeon, family physician, who all subspecialize in that particular thing. So you have a whole, panoply of doctors who can do that for you.
Got to find out what it is, and then we talked about what you can do about it. You start with PRP, you can go for exosomes, and you can go for stem cells, but probably not the random salad blender of stem cells you might get in the U.S. If it's someone else's. Okay.
Absolutely.
All right. Dr. Pradeep Albert, it is really an honor to have you on the show. You've trained so many of the experts in the field, including guys who've worked on me. And you really, with your new book, Regenerative Medicine Focused, you're becoming a meaningful voice in the whole longevity movement. It's not just making your cells younger. It's not just making your brain younger, which is a thing I recently did a podcast on. It's going through and being able to regenerate everything. And if you can't see it, you can't know what's going on and you can't work on it. This is like the non-lab work, important part of longevity and biohacking that we don't hear about a lot, but I think it's important. I never knew what kind of imaging to do for what. I mean, it hurts and you spend a bunch of money at a doctor and oftentimes they don't know. So I think we dispelled some myths here and just appreciate your future looking view.
Thank you so much. And it was an honor and a pleasure to be here. The book is called Lifespan Decoded. And so for those of you, want to look out for it in Amazon, I'd appreciate it.
Awesome. And guys, it's pretty common to, when you're publishing a book, to go out there and do a deal with a book publisher. And certainly I do that with my books because I'm looking for like the largest impact I can do. And it's a lot of work to do that. And it's actually not that profitable. I would make more money pulling shots of Danger Coffee at a coffee shop on a per minute basis than I would for writing books. Like it's a labor of love anyway. This is a book that's self-published on Amazon by two big name doctors. I promise you they're not doing it to make money. They don't want you to buy the book to make them feel good or to make any money. They put all their time into writing the book because it's actually stuff that you need to know. And it's stuff that isn't out there. So why would you waste your time on this?
Yeah, no, I'm hoping to God that people get a lot out of this. And, so we're just happy to be, here to kind of help, and talk about that and talk about all the other interesting things we talked about. So thank you so much.
You're welcome. All right. Final question as a book nerd. So Lifespan Decoded, you're putting it out there. Are you going to do an Audible version of it?
Absolutely, yes. We're going to have an audio version.
Are you going to read it yourself?
Yeah, well, we could use AI, but I think Alan and I are going to go back and forth because I think the little nuances of speaking would be useful, but I think that's what we're going to do.
People really appreciate it when an author reads a book. And so I highly recommend that. If not, you can use AI. But it does lose something.
Yeah, no, I think it's going to be like this, where we're going to just have a conversation and read the book as a conversation.
Oh, very fun. That would be cool. And because you own the book, you don't have to do it exactly the way everyone wants. You can do it your way.
That's right. Yeah.
Just like medicine.
That's right.
All right. Thanks again.
Thank you so much. Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
See you next time on the Human Upgrade Podcast.